I go to churches and I take a survey and I say, how many of you, I list 5 kinds of miracles in the book. And I won't go over them now, but how many of you have seen a specific answer to prayer that you know could not have been a coincidence? 80%, 90%. How many of you either know a person or you have a friend that you really trust who knows someone that was healed by prayer? 75%. How many of you had God speak to you in some way or other outside the Bible and give you a clear direction of something to do? Again, the numbers are high. There's all kinds of miracles happening in our churches, but no one tells it to each other, so we think nothing's happening.
Well, we are glad to be doing a second podcast with the great JP Moreland. If you didn't listen to the first podcast where we talked about his book, Finding Quiet, go back and listen to that. I introed JP and gave him all his accolades then. I'm not going to do it again. This guy's got an ego.
Well, I'm kind of disappointed, frankly.
He wanted to hear it all again.
JP Moreland is the distinguished
Don't you
professor.
Don't you dare.
No, JP is he's a brilliant thinker. He's a good man. We love this guy. And he wrote a book, his most recent book is a book called A Simple Guide to Experience Miracles. And in the introduction, I just want to read you 2 short paragraphs here in the introduction to just give you a taste. Here's what he writes at the very beginning of the book. In the middle of nowhere, 2 Christians were driving in the mountains of Iran in a car that was full of Bibles. Without warning, the steering wheel jammed and they were forced to the side of the road. Suddenly, an old man was knocking at the car's window, asking them where the books were. Confused, they asked what books he was referring to, and he responded, the books about Jesus. Continuing, the old man said an angel had recently appeared to him in a vision and shared about Jesus. And the man later discovered that everyone in his village had just had the very same vision. They had all believed in Jesus. Now the old man had a village full of infant Christians who had no idea what to do next. The old man shared that in another dream, Jesus told him to walk down the mountain and stand beside the road, and someone would bring him books about Jesus. He obeyed and selected the spot where he would stand, and just as expected, a supply of Bibles written in their language was provided for his village. Now that is an account of a miracle, and that the book is filled with those different kind of accounts. And I'm actually, parents might be wondering right now, like, hey, okay, why are we covering the topic of miracles
on the Maven Parent Podcast?
Yeah, what do miracles have to do with parenting?
Well, yeah, we were excited to talk to you about this book, JP, because we, in our family, one thing we've tried to do with our kids is to expand their view of God, is to read stories of Christians in our history so that they know our family history as believers. So reading stories of Christians in the past, but also we subscribe to the magazine Voice of the Martyrs, where they're learning about Christians all over the world who are serving God. And one thread that just comes out almost every time we read a story is how God is acting in these lives. Now, of course, we're having hindsight, so we get to see so clearly how God acted in these Christians' lives, either currently now all over the world or in the past. So when I saw your book, I thought, we have to get it because this is something I'm going to read to my kids. So we want to encourage you, parents. We'll just be upfront, parents. We want you to get the book, to not just read to yourself, but to read to your kids. And because we want to help you to help your kids to see the kind of God that we serve. So you're a philosopher. Why did you write a book on miracles?
Well, this is a good question. It's good to be with you again, by the way. 5 or 6 years ago, I did a fairly lengthy study of what the early church had in its mind as priorities in building believers. And so I read the book of Acts with fresh eyes, and I did a lot of work on the church fathers up until, and including the time of St. Augustine in the 400s. And then I called a gentleman who's a world-class expert in the church fathers and the early history of the church and asked him if my discovery was accurate, and he said absolutely. And I discovered there were three things that they centered on. This isn't all of it, but these were the three major things in Acts and all the way up. Number one, in no certain order, helping Christians learn what they believe and why, so that they could distinguish the Christian faith from what they were hearing in their culture. And they could distance from things that they should, or find common ground with things that were in common. Secondly, were the practices of day-to-day discipleship, and we call it spiritual formation, but the cultivation through habits and practices of a tender heart and a solid Christ-like character in the inner person. The third thing surprised me. They emphasized the manifest power of the kingdom of God through signs and wonders and miracles. And they actually showcased the absolute uniqueness of Jesus and his religion by virtue of the fact that they were able to heal the sick in his name and cast out demons, whereas other religions and even the secular people couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And so I tried an experiment, and I have 5 grandchildren from 13 down to 8, but this was a couple of years ago. We've done what we've best we can to try to, teach them to love the Lord Jesus. And so I've read, children's booklets to them and so on. And those were helpful. One of the things that I did not realize, though, is I started reading to them credible miracle stories, and angelic visitations, answers to prayer. And because I was able to find books, and in my book, A Simple Guide, I have a very selected bibliography in the back. If a person wants to explore more on a topic, I've selected trustworthy books that they can read. Well, I would read these stories. Papa, would you read another one? Read another one. Another one. And they remembered those stories, and what it did is it made the reality of the unseen world and of God just vividly real to them in a way that nothing else really could. Mm-hmm. And it whetted their appetite for hearing the miracles in the New Testament, for example. And so part of parenting, I think, is learning to enter in more and more to this and expose our children and grandchildren to what God is actually doing in the world today all around us.
Yeah, and we don't hear enough about that, because you mentioning reading those stories to your grandkids reminds me of, we've done that with our kids. And one of the books that we've read some of the accounts out of is one of your other books, The Kingdom Triangle.
That's right.
And I mean, there's, the classic Billy Graham's Angels book, but there's not a whole lot out there that
no,
we don't talk a whole lot about this. In fact, our culture, there's this skepticism surrounding miracles.
There sure is. And even in the church.
I was just about to say, it's not just in the culture.
That's right.
So many Christians, American Christians or Christians in the West, kind of maybe view this as odd. This is a little bit odd and peculiar. Yeah, it's part of the faith, but we don't talk a lot about it.
Right.
And so paint for us some of the backdrop there. Why are we as maybe Christians even embarrassed a little bit about this?
I actually addressed that as to why Westerners are embarrassed by the miracle stories in the scriptures. Whereas people in other parts of the world, that draws them because they tend to be power cultures, not so much propositional or idea cultures, but it should be a both and. And the problem is twofold for us Westerners. Number one, we tend to be skeptical of miracle claims because we have absorbed the worldview of naturalism without knowing it. Naturalism, the fact that science is what tells us it's what's real and the physical world is all there is. No Christian would actually say, well, I believe that. But it's in the drinking water. It is so pervasive that it's now just the unspoken assumption of American culture about how we can trust our knowledge of reality. And so when if you got a safe Christianity where you're just keeping it in what's in a book called the Bible, which I'm all for, but if you limit it to that and you don't allow God to actually be real today and doing things, it's safer. And so we don't want to be embarrassed, because a lot of stuff that goes associated with miraculous things in our church in the West is kooky, and it's a little bit out of bounds that way. But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm saying that I'm trying to present a sane, wise, hopefully, approach to entering in more to this. The second reason that people are skeptical is that we don't share our miracle stories with one another because we don't want to look like we're trying to brag and be super spiritual, or we don't want people to think we're kooky or we're weird. And so I go to churches and I take a survey and I say, how many of you, I list 5 kinds of miracles in the book, and I won't go over them now, but how many of you have seen a specific answer to prayer that you know could not have been a coincidence? 80%, 90%. How many of you either know a person or you have a friend that you really trust who knows someone that was healed by prayer? 75%. How many of you had God speak to you in some way or other outside the Bible and give you a clear direction of something to do? Again, the numbers are high. There's all kinds of miracles happening in our churches, but no one tells it to each other, so we think nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And it's not true, but the sense we get is, well, that stuff was for back then. It's not happening today. And I'm writing this book to draw people to love Jesus more and to have more courage and confidence when they step out to minister that God is real and with us, and He's still doing stuff.
Yeah, this is a good point for parents to sit back and go, what is my reaction when I think about the miraculous? Is there a hesitation there? And if there is, why is that the case? And to step back and just think, okay, how have I absorbed worldviews that don't fit with the Christian worldview, the Christian view of reality? And because if we're not talking about this with our kids, then we can unintentionally let them simply absorb the surrounding culture's worldview. So it's so important to think about why we feel skeptical or odd or embarrassed about these things. Now, you mentioned, and I think this is one of the best parts about your book, is just all the accounts that you give. Yes. And now tell us a little bit about your method on that, because these aren't just, hey, I heard from this guy over here.
Oh no.
You've done. Well, you're a philosopher. You're a careful thinker. You're like, I'm not going to get away with.
Well, as I mentioned, my reputation's at stake here, and I a lot of people trust me, and that means a lot to me. I don't want to let down people who trust me, so I'm not going to give a bunch of stories here that I haven't thoroughly vetted. And I've staked my reputation on the accuracy of there are 40 or 50 miracle stories in this book. And I interviewed people. I talked to different eyewitnesses. I have witnessed myself some of them, and I know people in our church that were eyewitnesses of some of these. And I gathered eyewitnesses. I called people and put hard questions to them, and I was able to verify through careful investigation that these are real and true. And so these stories are not things. There were so many I could have put in, but I didn't. I limited to the ones that I really knew I could back up.
Tell us the story about your colleague Klaus Isler.
Oh, yeah.
And the student there.
Yeah.
That's just such an encouragement.
Well, I have a good a friend, a lifelong friend of mine, Professor Klaus Isler, who is retired now from Talbot School of Theology, but he had a practice in his doctoral seminar of starting with asking anybody if they would like the class to pray for them. And there was one day, one young man in the class said, I am in a really bad situation because I really felt God called me to come here and finish a degree and go back into church work with my doctorate in education. But I am going to have to drop out because I can't afford the tuition payment for this semester, and I don't have any resources. My parents can't help. And so it's made me wonder if I missed God's call. And so I need a specific amount of money, and I forget the amount, but it was like
2,000.
I'll look it up. I'll get the exact account.
It's like 2,600 something.
It was a specific amount to the penny that his tuition payment was due, and it was due a week from the coming Friday, and I think it was like $2,176.29. Okay. He said, would you pray for that amount? And I'm asking for that specific amount because if God answers that, it will be beyond any reasonable doubt to me that my wife and I should stay and finish the degree. How much did you
$2,117.60.
Okay.
That was the exact amount of the tuition bill.
So the whole class prayed for this. So this wasn't done in a corner. There were several students who saw that happen, know the guy's name and so on. And so he was hoping for it in the next few days, but the weekend came and nothing came, and he was kind of disappointed. But he did have until the next Friday. And so that next week on a Tuesday, his wife was visiting her grandmother, who was really getting to the point where she needed to move into home care. But she was still living in her house by herself. And so she went over to clean the house. And there was a kind of a study that had a whole stack of papers and things that she'd accumulated, magazines. And so she was going through it and cleaning it. And something fell out of one of the magazines, and an envelope, she picked it up, and it was addressed to her. And she was curious, opened it up, and it was a check that was made out to her by someone, and it was like for
$2,000.
It was what?
It was $2,000.
$2,000.
Yeah.
Okay. But it blew her mind. I mean, it was incredible. So she told her husband about it, and he said, "This is fantastic, but this isn't what we prayed for. We prayed for this amount." And she said, "Well, it's still a good thing, and I'm gonna deposit it in the bank. At least that'll get us towards our goal." So she did. Oh, it was a
bonds.
It was a bond. That's right. It was a U.S. savings bond. And when the teller calculated the bond and the interest that it accrued, it came to the exact penny as to what they had been praying for, to the penny. Well, this guy freaks. And he obviously stayed and finished his degree and now is pastoring and loving ministry in a church, whereas he was going to go back into whatever it was he did. And the whole class was just rejoiced. Now, you can't explain that away. And in fact, in the book, I tell how to tell the difference between a miracle and just a coincidence or an accident. But one thing that's important is I list 14 reasons why God doesn't respond when it looks like he should. It looks like it's a great opportunity for him to intervene, and he doesn't. And I give 14 reasons why that happens. And if a person gets the book and they're dealing with something, God doesn't seem to be answering a prayer, there may be 2 or 3 of those that will help you. Not all 14, but maybe 2 of them. But I list in the first chapter 8 ways to strengthen your confidence in the supernatural and to take risks and step out. And one of the ways that I do that is to expose yourself to credible testimonies about the miracles people are seeing now. You do that in two ways. First, when you start going to church or your home group or whatever gathering you go to, ask a question. Hey, Bill, in the last year, have you ever seen anything happen that you would consider to be a genuine miracle? And you will be shocked at the stories that you hear when you just start asking people that question. Illustration. There was a young woman who read this book, and she was a part of a church that didn't really, wasn't too excited about this sort of thing. But she loved the Lord, and she'd been teaching this home group with about 12 people in her. And so she went to the meeting, and she said, I want to do something different tonight. I want to ask if anybody has seen, like in the last year or so, something you would consider to be a miracle. Well, she emailed me and said, we went on for 3 hours. I couldn't shut people up because they had so many stories and they were all authentic and obviously God's intervention. So the first thing is that we need to start telling our story or asking people, what have you seen and heard? Second is you need to start reading books on this that are credible. And that's why the bibliography works its weight in gold, because I have listed only credible stories, books to read. And so you want to expose yourself to these things, and you want to expose your kids to them. Mm-hmm. So that's that story.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can, before we go any further, I liked in the book how you were careful to define the difference between a miracle and a coincidence, what you brought up earlier. So for people who haven't read the book yet, maybe you can explain what your criteria was for a miracle.
Well, really, basically, it's a simple definition. Is a miracle is some intervention by a God or an angel or a demon. I'll explain that in a minute. Some intervention by God into the natural world that intervenes into the laws of nature and causes something to happen for a purpose that wouldn't have happened if that intervention had not taken place. And so I think angels and demons do activities, and I got a chapter on how we know they're real. And then I give illustrations of their manifesting themselves. Mm-hmm. And they do things too that are not physical law-governed behaviors. But the interesting thing is that when God performs a miracle, it is meant, among other things, to show that how much he loves us and to build our faith and encourage us. But what I worry about is that if a person sees something and they're just, oh my gosh, God is real and he knows I'm down here, and mm-hmm. he must love me because look what he did. And then all of a sudden you start thinking, well, you know what, that could have been a coincidence. And all of a sudden you're robbed of your rightful joy mm-hmm. from what God did. And there is a way to tell the difference. And so I'll explain it like this. In the natural world around us, we observe things that cause effects. Now sometimes the causes are purely natural events, like a flash of lightning mm-hmm. causes a tree to split. Now, the effect is the splitting of the tree, and the cause is that flash of lightning. And that kind of thing happens all the time. Sometimes the cause is not a natural event, but it's the act of an intentional act of a free agent and a rational person. So you come to my house and the dinner table's set, and you say, what caused that? And I will say, my wife, because I know my grandson doesn't have the power or the knowledge to do that, so it had to be someone with the power and knowledge how to do it. And it was done on purpose. No law of nature can explain why the dinner table is set the way it is. And the purpose is obvious because we must be having our Chinese neighbors over instead of our Mexican neighbors, because it is set for there to be tea and Chinese food. So I explained that, and this is done in the court of law all the time. The person, this is not an accident. It was caused by that dude right there, and it's beyond reasonable doubt. So we reason to actions by personal agents all the time. Now, this is done in science, and the principle I'm going to give you is not a religious principle. It is one that's been used in science for a long time, but it applies to our own experience of miracles. And the principle says this: if some event or some phenomenon you're looking at meets two conditions, then it is beyond any reasonable doubt it was done by the act of a free rational agent, and it wasn't an accident or coincidence. Now, the first one is that the event or the phenomenon has to be highly unlikely to happen, has to be highly improbable. But that's not enough, and here's why. I mean, suppose Brett and I were playing bridge and we had a $500 pot that we were playing for, and we deal the cards.
I'd be playing for a lot more.
Yeah,
JP.
well, I know.
I'm a gambler, buddy.
Well, there you go. I should have kicked it up. But so we're playing for this, and I'm the dealer, shuffle the card, and I deal myself a perfect bridge hand on the first deal. Now, my hand raises a suspicion that Brett's doesn't, but his is every bit as improbable as my hand. Because if somebody predicted that he would get those specific 13 random cards, that would be spooky. So any collection of 13 cards is as improbable as any other collection. So it has to be improbable, but that's not enough by itself because Brett's hand is improbable. It does. The second one closes the deal. And that is, there's something special about this event or this outcome apart from the fact that it happened. Illustration. There's no way to describe Brett's hand except some random set of 13 cards or other that he happened to get dealt. So it isn't special in any way except it's the cards he got. My hand's not like that. According to the rules of bridge that are independent of the deal, we're told that if anybody gets this specific arrangement of cards, you win. It's the combination of being special, independent of it happening, and it being unlikely that puts beyond any reasonable doubt that it was done on purpose. I'll illustrate this quickly in two ways. One, years ago, the Democrats used this principle to sue a Republican, and they won in a court of law. What happened was they were having state elections for the state assembly. And 8 districts were voting on the same day, and there were 7 or 8 parties in each district: Green, Libertarian, Republican, Democrat, and up to 7 or 8. Well, and what happened was in every one of those 8 districts, the Republican candidate was first instead of the Libertarian or whatever on all the ballots in all the districts. Now, that's highly unlikely, and you can actually predict the probability of that happening, and it's very low. But if any listing of the parties had been on each district's ballot, that might have been as equally improbable, but it wouldn't have bothered anybody. What was problematic is that having the Republican first on all those ballots was special, apart from the fact that it happened, and here's why. We know that whoever's listed first on a ballot tends to get more votes just because they're first. And the person in charge of producing all the ballots was a Republican. And so they sued him, and the fact that that result was unbelievably unlikely, but it was special because this guy had a vested interest in his party winning, and the one way he could do that was put his party on the first line, and they won, and they sued him and won. Not long ago, a group of anthropologists had discovered a cave in which there were Neanderthals, which I happen to think personally were descendants of humans, but they were rational beings. And it was clear that this cave had various artifacts and bones from Neanderthals. There was a formation on the cave, though, that there was a debate about. Some who thought it was a it was kind of a sculpture sort of thing that the Neanderthals had put on the cave wall. And a lot of anthropologists said, no, this is just cave erosion and formation by just random processes. Well, they applied the principle to the formation. And now it is almost universally agreed that it was produced on purpose by the Neanderthals because it satisfied these two criteria. I called it the intelligent agent principle. Mm-hmm. So once I was praying, when I went back to serve Campus Crusade, I was praying for a white house with a white picket fence with a nice grassy front yard around 2 miles from the Colorado School of Mines. And I set an amount that I knew that my roommate and I couldn't pay any higher than that because we wanted a place for people to come over. And I looked by myself for 2.5 days, and I must have looked at 20 or 30 places, and I didn't find anything in Golden. The only thing we could find was an apartment that was over the amount it was 11 miles into Denver. I got a call from a staff worker who didn't know anything about what I was praying. Kaylin Carr was her name. And she said, Jerry, you still looking for a place to live, you and Ray? And well, Ray's raising support, but I'm trying to find a place. She said, well, I was at Denver Seminary today, and on the bulletin board, there's a pastor who's got a place he wants to rent to Christians in Golden. Here's his phone number. Maybe you can get it. So I called the pastor, and he gave me directions, and I met him the next morning. I drove up to a white house with a nice white picket fence all around it, lovely grassy front yard, 2.1 miles from campus, and it was $20 a month under what we'd asked for. Mm-hmm. Now, was that a coincidence? Well, let's look at it. How likely was it that I would find that specific kind of house? Not likely. Mm-hmm. But unlikely things happen all the time. Was it special? Oh, yeah, because it was exactly what I prayed for. And it was the fact that there was something special about finding that kind of house as opposed to 11 miles into town in Denver. And that happened. That indicates beyond any reasonable doubt that God intervened and that was a miracle. It was an answer to prayer.
Mm-hmm. Let me narrate, I think, a little bit of what this discussion's been about so far. And for parents, so we're talking about this issue of miracles. We're saying, hey, this is something we need to be talking to our kids about. But what we're offering here and what JP offers in the book is an intelligent Christian, not response, but account of this.
Yes.
Which is what we need for our kids.
Absolutely.
And when we talk about kids, and particularly as our kids get into middle school and high school, we talk a lot about explaining not just the what, but the why. And so, especially if you've got middle schoolers or high schoolers and you talk about miracles, you want to be able to say something more than, well, because the Bible tells us so, or, well, God did it. And what's so helpful for us as parents here is that JP is giving us some good thinking for us as parents to lean on and to say, hey, not only is this a miracle, here are good reasons why we think this is a miracle.
You bet.
And what that does is it strengthens our faith.
It does.
And our kids' faith in the Lord. It gives us confidence that what we believe is actually true.
Yes, exactly. And I will tell you, if you read these stories to your kid, well, first of all, if you read them, you're going to be thrilled. Mm-hmm. And if you read them to your kids, they're going to love it too. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, there are a couple of stories in there. I won't go into both of them. But my daughters now are in their early 40s, and they're married and live near us, and we have 5 grandchildren. And they know beyond any doubt that God answers prayer. They know it. And the reason is that this happened to us so many times when we were growing up in our family that we made note of it. I'll give you one story. Now, a lot of times God doesn't. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. But we've had too many times when there's been somebody on the other end of the line, mm-hmm. and we know it. Mm-hmm. When they were in middle school, 7th and 9th grade, we wanted them to start hanging around our house and not elsewhere because they were starting to get the boy thing. And so we wanted them with us. Mm-hmm. And so the girls said, Dad, can we get a swimming pool? And our backyard was not very big. We have a hill, and it was not very fun to go out there because we had a water sprinkler, and the hill was sagebrush with gullies and dirt and dandelions. And so we didn't enjoy going back there. Could we have a swimming pool? And I said, girls, no. I mean, number one, we can't afford one. I just don't get paid that much. But number two, girls, I'm not very good at fixing things. And if some company comes over here and starts on it, and they get to a place and they say, oh, we're going to have to increase this by 5,000 because we ran into this kind of problem, I wouldn't know what to do. And I would be vulnerable to overpaying. So I said that, but then I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pray and see if the Lord has an opinion on this. I don't know if he does. So I started praying, and that was toward the end of the week. It was, I think, a Friday. And I said, Lord, I don't know what in the world to do, and I don't know if you care or not. But if there is something that you think needs to be done here, could you let me know? Mm-hmm. And I'll go whatever direction, if you have a view, that you lead. So it was just kind of bothering me because I wanted to provide, but I just wasn't able to. And I felt almost like kind of a failure, to be honest. Well, I go into the Biola on Monday. This was August, so the students weren't back, and nobody's on campus, but I'd go once a week to check my mail. And I was in my office looking through my mail, and there was a knock on the door. And I opened the door, and it was a guy named Glenn Cadzillo. Now, Glenn had studied, he was an older fellow. He was in his 30s when he did an undergrad, but he majored in philosophy at Biola. Then when he graduated, he went to Tennessee to be with his brother and got a job out there. And he had called me around Christmas to tell me that he had decided to come back and do our MA in philosophy for the next fall. And he had apparently, well, Glenn, I said, my gosh, good to see you. What are you doing here? And he said, well, I just got in town yesterday. I'm living in the dorm here, but I'm going to check and get a place here in the next few days. And I'm back. And he said, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm all right. I said, I'll be honest. I don't know why I said this, but I've been really bothered because my kids would like a swimming pool. And Mom and I'd like to have one so they'd get their friends at our house, not someplace else. But I can't afford it, and I'd get taken to the cleaners, and I just don't think we can do it. And he said, well, why don't you let me build it for you? I said, what are you talking about? He said, don't you know what I did for a living when I was doing my undergrad work here? I said, no. He said, Moreland, I design and oversee swimming pools for multimillionaires. And he said, I got my job back with Kersey Pool, and I'm their main salesman now. And I have a housing addition of 50 homes, and I'm in charge of all the pools. And if you will let me do this for you, I can get it at half price because I'll tell these contractors, you give this guy a 50% discount, and I'll give you 50 pools. And they're going to do it, and I'll oversee the whole thing. And he said, if you'd let me do this, it'd be an answer to prayer for me. And I said, what? How is that? Well, before I came out of here, my Sunday school class had a gathering to send me off, and they raised money for me for my first year tuition. And the guy who gave me the check from the class said, one requirement, and that is that when you get out there, you do something good for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I knew immediately I wanted to help you, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what I could do. And this will give me a way that I can serve because people serve me. He designed it. It is a stunning pool. We got it for dirt cheap, but it is a very waterfalls, hot tub. The thing's crazy. There's a stream flowing in it. And my grandkids and my daughters have been in that thing more times than you can count. Now, they saw that, and they've seen other things like that. Mm-hmm. And so they know by me sharing these and then reading stories of other people, they got the idea that this stuff is actually real, and I'm going to pray because God may do something. And I told them, look, you may not, mm-hmm. but he does. And so why not pray? There's an illustration of how it helps.
Yeah. Well, and just, I think that illustration just, it reveals just the goodness of God. I mean, what a generous God to provide that.
How about something that, quote, small?
Yeah.
Wasn't small to them.
Yeah.
But
And all the joy that's come from that.
Yeah. And I think because we want to teach our kids about the goodness of God.
Yes.
But sometimes, what do we do besides a sermon or,
Right.
and this story, your story illustrates what Brett and I have tried to practice too, of inviting the kids into life with us.
Sweet.
And to let them know, hey, we're praying for this, or, oh, you care about this? Well, let's pray and ask God for that. And
You bet.
it's actually a simple way we can do it and invite our kids into the Christian life with
You
us.
bet. I love that.
And I just love that story so much. And I think about how there's been times where Brett and I have been, especially these years in ministry, and I can think of several times where it was, well, we need a few more support dollars to come in this month or whatever it was. And we invited the kids into, hey, let's pray for this.
Yeah.
And so when God provided, like your daughters, they saw it
They
for
saw
their
it
own
with their
eyes.
own eyes.
And
Yeah,
it
well,
wasn't just us saying, hey, you guys, God's so good. He did. It's like we invited them into the struggle
That's
of
exactly
it. And
right.
then they got to see the answer too.
We have specific stories. There was one time where we really, our support account at this ministry I was at had that month, it had gone into the red, and the ministry was gracious enough to say, hey, we're going to cover you this month, but we can't keep covering you. And we had prayed, and I told the kids, let's pray for a specific dollar amount. We prayed for $25,000.
What?
We
Seriously?
prayed for $25,000, and the kids were all praying, and they were younger at that point, and they hadn't absorbed any of the skepticism, and it was like no big deal. Okay,
I know. They're
God,
like, all right.
God, give us $25,000 for our ministry account. And that month, a supporter met with me, and he wrote me a check, and it was $25,000.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, see, hello.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll bet you when you told that story to your kids, not only did it make God bigger than life to you, but I'll bet it encouraged them, and they won't ever forget that.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
But see, you could also do this by reading credible stories.
Exactly.
So there are 40 or 50 in there,
Yeah.
and then other things. So I like the idea of bearing witness to these things. And that's a great story right there.
Yeah. So pause right now, jump online, and buy JP's book, A Simple Guide to Experience Miracles, and
read it with your kids. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk a lot on the podcast about learning with our kids. And I know, especially for me, I've in areas where the kids will ask a question and I won't know an answer, or just whatever it is in life. And I just have tried to adopt this model. Well, I'll learn with you. And if someone's listening thinking, I don't have these stories.
Right. That's okay.
It's okay, because you belong to a church that has these stories,
And
and
so
they're
take
our
advantage of
family.
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so get the book and read the stories with your kids, and let God show you
Amen.
who he is by what he's doing, all around us, and of course in history too.
Well, and I got an advanced copy of it and was reading it, and it actually just worked out that at our church we were teaching through the Book of Acts.
No way.
And I think right when we got into that, then the book came, and I've been reading through the book, and it's been interesting to see how it's even awakened my own noticings more. Like as I'm reading through the Book of Acts, I'm just noticing more the miraculous at every turn.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's good for the kids and good for us as well, because we need this stuff as well.
We all do.
And you, Erin, you have a couple of, for younger kids. I mean, these accounts can be read for the younger kids. They're just so riveting.
Yeah.
But then you've also got some other books.
Yeah, and maybe we'll link to these in the show notes, but just along this theme of inviting the kids into seeing what God can do, the power of God. There's a whole children's book series called Little Lights, and we'll link to them in the show notes. I'll hold them up here if you're watching on YouTube. But one of the stories JP talks about in the book is there's a children's book about it, Helen Rooseveer, and she was a missionary in Africa, and an incredible story of God answering a prayer that she had for these orphans. And I love this story too, because it incorporates the faith of the children that she was ministering to and asking for, well, let's ask for a baby doll too. And Helen's thinking, well, that's a little bit too much.
Right.
But the little girl prays, and God brings even this little baby doll. And anyway, so these are just stories of Christians who have gone before us. Eric Little's story in there, of course, the miracle of him winning the Olympic race when he wouldn't, race on a Sunday. So yeah, this is a good we've read all these to our kids, so we'll link to them.
Yeah, and did you mention the first one?
Which one?
Helen's story is that JP includes that.
Yes,
in his book.
I did say that.
Okay,
yeah.
So there's good resources out there.
Mm-hmm.
Get JP's book. It's this is an essential part of our worldview. It's and our view really starts with origin, right? And our origin is a supernatural origin.
Absolutely.
And so that just opens up the universe
to
God's supernatural work. And so I think strengthening our kids' views on God will help make miracles and these miracle stories more plausible. And from the opposite direction, hearing these accounts will help give our kids and ourselves more confidence and faith that God is real and he's working. So.
And I think too, just to add, it reminds us that the Christian life is exciting, because there's
a very good point.
There's struggle there, we devote our lives to Christ. We carry the cross, as Christ tells us to do, lay down our lives. But it is exciting to lay down our lives and live for Christ and to follow God. And he's so amazing in what he does. And if we don't have stories in our own lives at the moment, again, to learn from brothers and sisters in the church is so encouraging because of what it teaches us about him. So
thanks for writing this book.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.